You're listening to the Light Over Time podcast with David Sargent and Korey Bartos. It is April 23rd, 2023, and Sony still has not updated the A1 or the A7S III. How you doing today, bud?
I'm all right. I think probably better than you at this point.
It's all good. It's been a good weekend. How'd the farmer's market go yesterday?
Good. I have been the only one selling coffee there for a little while, and I kind of got word through the grapevine that I may be the only coffee vendor this summer at that market, which is basically, it's banger because every time the other vendor doesn't show up, I double. It's great. So yeah. I did good. I went in with like 20 some bags and I came home with 6. That's fantastic. And somebody came by today and picked apart half of what I had left. So it's been good.
Cool. Sounds good. What are you drinking today?
I think it's the same Ethiopia I had last week. It's a Yirgacheffe from Adame Gorbota. Yep, same stuff, but different roast. I roasted it. I think it's a little bit darker, just a hair darker. Still really nice. Tangerine just comes out super punchy.
Nice. I'm, again, just doing the old factory coffee cold brew. Living the dream. So today, I know we're going to dig into the Adobe Lightroom updates, things like that. I have been heavily considering swapping systems. I have a buddy who rented a 70-200 Sony, and he's going to let me know if he's going to buy mine. And if he buys mine, it'll be for a pretty good price for both of us. But I've had it for a couple of years or since basically launch, and I'll still get over $2,000 for it. So I'm tiptoeing to see if that's going to happen. We'll see. But I got wind of that. I'm gonna shoot a little bit with it this week because I honestly haven't. I haven't really picked up that 70-200 in a while, and I haven't done a lot of photography with the 20-70 yet. So I need to. You know, when I'm about to evaluate switching systems, I got to get my feet wet and actually go do a bunch of different shooting to make sure it's the right move.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, your tiptoeing tends to move pretty fast, so.
Yeah, it's more like a dead sprint most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, right, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so I guess we can jump right into the Adobe stuff today. I have played with it. I can tell you out of the updates, I think the most compelling and interesting updates is the additions to the masking, because I mask all my stuff in Lightroom, and holy heck, they added curves, and that's mega.
Yeah, I would agree. As much as I have some stuff to talk about, the noise reduction stuff, the masking it was already pretty good for Lightroom, and now it's just kind of above and beyond like what you're able to automatically select, like people's facial hair in different parts, the eyes, the irises, the pupils. Just it's able to segment such amazing to a fine degree that it really takes out a lot of work for a lot of people. This is probably game changer for a ton of people.
Yeah, what was most interesting to me is just how accurate so you can select person now, and you can select clothes and facial hair and everything, even when it's like a relatively wide shot and a busy shot. I was going through like a bunch of shots of like people shooting firearms, and then like some of my old camp photos. One of the things I was going to talk about, I'm going through the last 5 years of all my RAWs, and I'm going to clean up some of my hard drives. But so just like re-editing old photos and stuff like that. And it's really good masking. I think the only thing I want from Lightroom to not have to round trip all the time, because I round trip almost most of my photos for especially for work, right? Is just to have the spot healing work like Photoshop. Because man, do I just like, I always go, okay, I don't have to do that much of it, so I'll just use Lightroom, and then I inevitably get irritated and go, it's bad. I'm going into Photoshop.
That is one of my biggest complaints too. It processes using the hardware available either differently or doesn't use GPU acceleration at all for spot healing. Sure. And I think that's the case because in Photoshop, it is instant, and it has been on older systems of mine. The clone stamping, spot healing, content aware, all that stuff is way faster on Photoshop. If you've used that and compared the two, you know that. I have to believe that they're just not leaning into GPU acceleration and
But
haven't been.
there's tool differences too, which frustrate me because like they
Yeah,
don't just have like the standard spot heal where it just like kind of and it just takes care of it for you. It
right.
always kind of has to be like
It's not
patchy.
content aware. It tries to pick a
Yeah,
spot. And,
it's
yeah,
it's basically using the patch tool, but like slightly
right.
quicker. Which like for me, that's not what I like to use because I'm
I was
usually
hoping. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say I'm normally cleaning up like small pieces of dust and little hairs and stuff off of products. And if
Mhm.
I could do that in Lightroom, my life would be so much easier because when I have to do that for like 25 images, it's such a drag to round trip 25 images and then have a TIFF of all of the raws. I'd like to just do it on a raw. I don't need to do layers for that kind of workflow. I just need to like clean it up and then do some local adjustments.
Yeah, I have to imagine, given now that they're moving forward with more AI, that the next feature or one of the next features has to be a more powerful spot healing in Lightroom. It's got to be. I can't imagine that they'll make another one that is slower, though. That's the problem. When we get into this noise reduction stuff, it takes more time. I really hope that they have an AI driven spot healing that is more powerful, more aware than something like content aware or like a smart clone stamp patch type of thing that happens now. So I want something more powerful than that, as long as it doesn't come at the cost of speed, because that is one of the biggest things for me for sure.
Yeah, pretty wild, especially like domestic dogs all the time. I like to clean up eye goop, and
Hmm.
you can't do eye goop in Lightroom because it's garbage. And it's just like a couple of little tiny things, but I could completely get the entire photo done in Lightroom other than like eye goop on a dog. And it's like, oh, I don't want to round trip it just for that.
Even if it's not AI driven, I kind of wish we just had the OG clone stamp that just brushed in with like a nice gradient brush, like you can do in Photoshop really easily. Because that's super fast. And
Yeah.
I really like to do that in Photoshop as well. A lot of times, spot healing in Lightroom is just clunky and slow.
Yeah. I bounce between the two, especially with some of that food stuff I was doing recently. It's basically constantly between spot healing, patching, and the actual clone stamp, and it has to be in Photoshop at that point because it's just such a
Yeah.
heavy situation. But yeah, it was cool. I mask at least 3 masks on almost all of my finished images, whether it just be exposure stuff or if I'm masking out the subject and adding a little bit more depth and stuff like that. Like it's so easy to do now, and you used to have to do just so many. I had actions in Photoshop for
Yeah.
years just to
Hmm.
like kind of speed up that process, but it was still slow. And
Hmm.
now it's just insane. It's
Yeah. I would agree. I used to do a lot of action stuff in Photoshop as well to basically get to the same point. And it's not so much a speed difference now because actions are pretty, or used to be a pretty quick thing to do to get to kind of what we can do now in Lightroom so quickly. And I'm sure there's still people diehards using actions for things like luminosity masking.
oh yeah.
But Lightroom has just become so incredibly powerful. It's crazy to watch.
Yeah, I still the 2 main actions I use still are like frequency separation for retouching, and then I'll
Hmm.
do I have one for I do a lot of the blurred faces for like law enforcement and stuff if they're like
Yeah.
undercover, things like that, and I have it literally duplicate, add a Gaussian or a motion blur, and then mask it, and then have the white brush ready, and that's like I use that almost every day at work, and it's so
Oh,
nice.
nice.
Um, so this is your calling. If you don't know what Photoshop actions are, you can record different steps and basically automate it so you can make your workflows really fast. Definitely look up Photoshop actions if you're not using them and you tend to do a bunch of steps all the time.
And if you're doing things like product cataloging, not combining actions with batch processing can be huge depending on what your needs are. I remember back in the day, like Photoshop CS4, CS5. I don't know if batch process was new, but we definitely were using it to digitize old catalogs of paper product dimensions and things like that. And man, was that a time saver. And I'm sure the same process can now be done just a million times faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Mega. So we're going to kind of combine the next two questions I have for you because obviously I want to get your take on the denoise. You've been messing with it for, the last 5 days or whatever since it dropped. And then you were also out this morning shooting wildlife, and I'm sure those two things are relatively connected. So
Yeah.
you can kind of start wherever you'd like, but I'm
Sure.
curious to hear how this morning went and the other shooting this week.
Yeah. We'll bounce off of the technical for a moment. I've spent probably more time shooting this week than I have all winter. It's been just amazing. Like, I've taken the camera out. You guys heard last week where I was like starting to dip away from being inspired to do landscape photography because I saw one warbler, and I haven't seen the warblers back yet. That must have been one fluke, but I have been shooting wildlife nonstop. I just took 1,500 images this morning. I've probably taken 3,000 to 4,000 in this week alone. And only like 5% of those are even close to being keepers. But point is, I've been out probably 4 days this week in terrible conditions, which is like awesome. It's so much fun, dude. When you're out in a place where like the birds are just going all over, they're on perch after perch, and there's so many of them, and we're in breeding time, so like plumage is look really weird, and it's just everything's all over the place. And I'm having freezing rain hit my camera, hit my lens, just coating me. My hands are just cold. But there's like no place else I want to be at the time. So I've just been doing that nonstop. I started the last week before the denoise tool dropped, just, having a ton of fun. And I probably wouldn't have shot so much had this tool not dropped because I've been very interested to use it. So with that said, I have been using it, and it's pretty great. Now, to preface, I just want to say that if you've been using or have used Topaz Labs or any of the other AI-powered denoise tools in the past, this is not revolutionary. It's not a game changer in that sense. It's just a really nice tool to have built into Lightroom without the need for a plugin or a side program. It's just great. Did you play with it at all, really?
Oh, yeah. I played with it a bunch.
Okay, so what's been your experience so far?
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, very helpful. I never liked Topaz. A lot of the stuff where like I was hoping that this type of technology would like really help. The kind of artifacts you get with the noise reduction in general it often isn't that helpful to me in the cases in which I want to use it. So doing a lot of stuff in the machine shop, it just absolutely obliterates textures. So like even on really low percentages, like if you're looking at like machined metal and stuff like that, it has no idea what to do with those really complex, like I don't even know what you would call it, but like, the structures within like a metal. And it just makes it look weird. And so if it's a really bad image, actually, just to backtrack a little bit, the thing that started me going through all my hard drives was I was going back to find noisy images and things that I could start playing with, right? And see if there's anything that like I needed. But I could not, maybe 25, 30 images. I couldn't find any that this made better than what I had already done to edit the photo. And there's, I guess, like a lot of it's pixel peeping, but there's this thing that, I've played around with Midjourney and Dolly and stuff enough that, and I know you have as well, that whatever like AI is doing to just not know what textures are and make it look like textures, it's like my eyes laser focus on it. Like I can just see now because like, I was doing a whole bunch of like, okay, let me see how this photo is AI and not like a photograph or something. And I'm just it just like rocks. I did some of the that island that we shot when we were up for that one workshop when with Rufa and stuff. Like the rocks like look like AI rocks all of a sudden. And I'm like, okay, just because those small details, like don't touch the details of like the actual texture, get rid of the noise. Like, so for me, in a lot of the ways that I was hoping this would improve like the standard noise reduction, I haven't so far found a benefit because I've gotten used to noise. Like the acceptable amount of noise is different now because my ISO performance is so better now. So I have to jump on. I'm going to go find some 7D photos. I don't have them on my hard drive. I have to get an external to go back and look at a bunch of my 7D photos. I think they'll probably improve those ones quite a bit, but honestly, man, like since I switched to Sony, I couldn't find a GH5 photo that it would like benefit from. So the cameras are just so good.
Yes,
we needed it 10 years ago.
You are talking pretty much exactly the kind of conversation I've been having with myself this last week. When the tool dropped, I was like, oh, sick. This is what I've always wanted. And you just said it. It's what I've wanted for a decade. It is a decade late. Basically, what we have now, even in the last, let's say, 5 years of modern camera sensors, is performance that lends itself to not needing to be denoised at all, right? Yeah. Like the images we're getting, 99% of people who are shooting 99% of their content, most likely some of you who don't have social media or don't care to post on social media, you can ignore this. The rest of us are posting 99% of our work online, or 100% of it, and some of it gets printed, right? Most of that work is going to be seen on a 5 to 6 inch screen. And the internal conversation I've had with myself, which is kind of an extra step in this enlightenment of like not worrying so much about some settings and like how high the ISO gets, is it just doesn't matter that much anymore. We needed this back when noise was big and purple, you know?
Right.
We needed this when we had 12 to 16 megapixels to work with, and most of it was just garbagey noise. And we needed this when there was tons of hot pixels all over the place. Now, the noise is part of the texture and part of the detail, and it's so close to being accurate that you're right. When you apply this noise reduction, as good as it is, there are scenarios where it does damage. And these artifacts are particularly AI looking. But I have some notes, if you would allow me to kind of expand.
Yeah, I'll just step in and just respond to that. Like, I think one of the factors that's so great is that, like, you and I are both using now a middle tier professional camera. You know, I had a 61 megapixel camera, but now, like, we're on a 33 megapixel sensor. And it has enough detail, and, you know, the pixel density is such that, like, noise is very small.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, it's not a, you know, sub 20 megapixel sensor anymore. It's backside illuminated in most cases.
That's exactly what I was going to say. BSI sensors changed the game for that.
There's literally so many things that these sensors are doing now that just like the noise is such a different factor. Now,
it is.
I do believe, and I think I will find some images when I get into my external hard drives where this could be really incredible, because I do know that even as long ago as, not long ago, as early as like 5 years ago, this wasn't always the case still. Even with something like a 5D Mark IV, once you started pushing those, they were pretty rough. I know some people that have taken incredible images of now deceased people at like their wedding and a bunch of stuff. I often get asked from my father to kind of retouch and just make some of his older photos of like his family members and like his, you know, my stepmom's family members, like make those clean, right? And as far as like a repair tool where you just want to kind of make memories like cleaner, it's pretty incredible. I will say, like, it's different than the old school Lightroom noise reduction. They both have their place. I'm not just gonna poo-poo this AI one because it's incredible, but it's not magic, and there's just times where it's not ideal. It's exciting, and I'm glad that they're making, you know, waves, because I spend a lot of money on Adobe software. Like, keep updating, because Sony doesn't. So I need somebody I pay to update their stuff.
Yep. Yeah. I and many others have been kind of asking for this to be in Lightroom for a long time, since basically the birth of Topaz, Denoise, and others like it. I know there are a couple other programs out there that I'm not talking about. In fact, if you want a good visualization, I just watched Nick Page's video that he dropped of comparing Lightroom versus Topaz versus what's the other one? I can't remember. There's a third one he did. It's a very good video. It's very practical. They're very close. That's the bottom line, is they're very close. And I don't think, if you don't have Topaz now, but you do have Lightroom, don't bother getting Topaz for denoise. If you don't have any other one, don't bother. It's just built in and it's close enough, and your workflow will suffer for it unless you really like the others for some reason.
I really didn't like the workflow using Topaz Lab stuff, man.
Yeah.
It was a drag. So this is huge.
Yeah, I didn't even use the plugin when I did have the Topaz stuff. And so as a side program, it was not great. And even with the plugin, which I'm sure there's multiple for other programs too, I still don't think that's the best solution. And I think with what we have now, it's much closer to being part of a good workflow. That said, it's not perfect. You can only use this. It's in the enhanced dialog box. So if you right click on an image, enhance, this is where the super resolution feature existed for the last few updates. Now lies this new AI denoise feature there in that box. You can only use it on raw photos. I can't use it on JPEGs. I don't know why. I don't know why they don't want to process that, but fine. Is what it is. And there's a lot I've been looking at. So I started this week shooting a lot of the birds and wildlife and stuff at like ISO 12,800. A lot of diffused light because there's a lot of cloudiness, a lot of weather. So a very diffused soft light. And what I was needing was to be able to push my shutter speed up to like somewhere between 1,500 and 1,000, usually sitting around 1,800 at about 550 millimeters with that Sigma lens. I don't like to be below 500 because I don't use a gimbal or a tripod or anything, so I'm handheld, and you can start to see images suffer even with good stabilization. So I was at ISO 12,800 shooting song sparrows, and I had a really good time doing that. And what was really cool, this like secondary conversation going on in my mind going, oh, I don't have to worry as much about how noisy this could get if I allow my ISO to get up, beyond 8,000 or 10,000 or whatever. And so I did. I just shot, ISO 12,800 that whole evening. I came home and I started playing with this tool for the first time, realizing there is like a sweet spot for this thing to work good. There were images I took at ISO 1000 where I didn't need to do much to the image. The exposure was pretty well gray, where you want it in the middle of the histogram. And at ISO 1000, when you get the exposure right, noise doesn't matter at all at that point. There's
not
nothing
even a little
to
bit.
Fix.
They're so clean now. It's awesome.
But that said, I tried the tool anyway. I was like, all right, what's going to happen? And you get this implanted artifacting. Like, it didn't need to add anything to this image, but it decided there's work to be done. Might as well add something. And all of a sudden, my image looked really weird, as if AI produced it. We don't want that. Yeah. In fact, I've been looking at a lot of things online in the last couple of weeks going, is this AI? Is this AI? That's been a question in my head constantly. So I really want to get away from that. What we need to do as photographers and anyone else who wants to use this kind of tool is go, how do I use this in such a way that I produce what I want to produce without it being so obvious that I used it? So that worked really well once I started applying it to the images that I shot at ISO 12,800, where I was a little bit underexposed. Not a ton. There was still plenty of shadow information, but I needed to boost up about 2 stops. And what happened was it was pretty noisy at that point, because even a well-exposed 12,800 is fine. But when I needed to boost it a little bit, the noise became more apparent. So then I applied this noise reduction at about 50% where it's standard, where it defaults, and it was really good. Like, some of the textures on the branches had a little bit of artifacting, but you really had to pixel peep to see it. Even at 50%, that's kind of a lot. I would recommend going a little lower, anywhere between 30 and 50%. Even 20% is pretty good. But I will say, when I just needed to boost the exposure a little bit, and we were already up in ISO, that was where the sweet spot was for me. Now, I went out this morning Well, I took 1,500 images. It was very cloudy all morning. I started before sunrise, so there was basically no light to be had. I let it go up to 32,000, and I only just did like one image right before the show here to see how it performed on that, and it's awful. At ISO 32,000, there's not a good amount of information there to begin with. The ISO performance isn't terrible, but the available light, it was very underexposed.
Yeah.
So I didn't even really want to push it. I just wanted to see, okay, what's it going to do to this very underexposed, very noisy image to begin with? And it was just artifacts just all over the place. So there's absolutely a sweet spot to this thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so let me just take a step back. So I think one, the notion that like it's trying to find noise, and if noise isn't present, it's going to say that detail is noise, is probably fair to say. This, again, is the first implementation of it properly within Adobe software, so like I'm going to give it a little bit of, I'm sure it will get better. Most of their AI stuff does, but it certainly needs to be like a properly noisy image, which I kind of said at the beginning of this like segment that like it's hard to have a properly noisy image nowadays. Like, because, okay, so there's like trying to repair an image that was a failed image, right? Like, this is noisy now because the exposure was completely wrong. Everything about it, like, I am like desperate to just save it so I can say it's a photo, right? We've all been there at like maybe a wedding or something, and you like really wished that frame was good, and you're just like, maybe I can fudge it and it's fine. It's probably not going to do well there. Then you have a noisy image that is properly exposed, which is more rare, I think. I feel like when a lot of people have conversations about like repairing tools and stuff, it's kind of the latter, where it's like, this image isn't a good image to begin with, kind of, and I want to save it. But in my little experience in concert photography or like just playing, shooting house shows and stuff like that, you're in relatively normal like exposure ranges, but it's noisy because you have to crank your ISO a little bit, but you have a lot of dynamic range where you have like true blacks and true whites because, you have like hard light on a basement show, let's say. I'm going to be curious as to how it handles a situation like that, where again, that would be a situation where I would want it and have historically just turned the image black and white because the noise was like just going to lean into it. It's grain and black and white now. Those are kind of like, it's a sliver. It's a sliver of a use case, but I think like you were saying, I was finding around like 28 to 35 on the right kind of image to repair was the most reasonable I've seen. But I was even seeing it around 18 and 22 on the slider where they were still getting detailed artifacts, and it was because maybe there wasn't enough noise. And it was overcorrecting something that it didn't have to. So it's interesting for sure. And I think the only time it's like really good is if it's like the perfect image to take the algorithm or whatever AI is. I don't even know if it's probably real AI. I think we've changed the meaning of AI these days. But
yeah, probably. I think it's probably just really, really smart algorithms, but sometimes it overcorrects, like you said. However, I do think that there's a lot of people out there who's going to benefit from this because you and I are using equipment that 90% of the world probably isn't using. Mom and dad are using D3200s, Rebel T3Is or whatever still. There's still a lot of those cameras floating around, and there's a ton of people, even if they're passionate about photography, just don't have the money to upgrade. This is going to be a really cool tool for them to go, oh, extra performance I didn't have before. On a Rebel T3, that's pretty old school by today's standards. On a D3200, those kind of cameras are just going to see huge gains from, like we said, these conditions where it's really appropriate to try and tackle that noise issue.
Yeah, I think they're going to be great. Like I said in previous episodes talking about the 70, after 800 ISO, you're SOL. Like, it's real bad. It's rough instantly. So, and that's with like fast glass and stuff. Like, you're struggling. So it'll be interesting. I'm excited to find some of my older photos because I think 2017 I was still running a 7D Mark I at camp. So I probably have like at least 2,000 photos. Hopefully I still have all the raws where I could probably go back and really see how this is working for something that's more consumer level. But yeah.
Yeah, I have just one last note about this, and it was basically that oh shoot, I just let it leave my mind. On noise reduction. We'll move on. It'll come back to me later.
Right on. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. I'm excited to see what Adobe does with the next couple of things, because there are a couple of other tools I'd like to see come to Lightroom. The curves for colors in Lumetri and Premiere, I want to see for photo so freaking bad, because if I can make my whites and my blacks actually white and black and then adjust the colors inside of it, that would change everything. And I can do it in Photoshop, but even today in Photoshop, it takes a lot of effort to go in, make sure that your white and black ranges stay desaturated, and you can play with all the color in between, like just pump up blues in the shadows, but the true black is still black. Like, I want that in Lightroom so very bad.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think there's plenty of tools that Photoshop has that they're not going to want to immediately just bring over to Lightroom, because they are two different programs. However, if you just pay the cheapest plan they have, you get both.
Yeah.
So it's we live in a strange space. Well, unless you want something singular. Yeah.
No, like, but even that tool, that's not even like a tool in Photoshop, really. Like, you have to do some really janky masking and like color range. Like, it's not easy to do. It's very cumbersome, and it's literally just a flat curve in Lumetri. It's such a cool tool.
Right.
And I've been on Adobe forums and like suggested it multiple times. Because I didn't have the language at the time when I first wanted it to figure it out. Then I went back and people have been asking for it for like a decade. Yeah. And it's like, oh, come on, it'd be so good. Because I've actually taken like an image that I finished. I'd color grade the crap out of it. I've put it in Premiere and desaturated the whites and blacks and sent it out, because like it was just the little touch that would be so good. So I've ran photos through Lumetri and then took the JPEG out of it, because it's good. It's so good. It's a sick tool.
Wow. I remember what I was going to say about AI denoise here in Lightroom. One cool thing about this, and maybe this is a downfall too, there's two-parter. You can do as many images as you want in one go. Highlight all the images you want to do it to in your film strip. I think that's what they still call it, right? At the bottom, film strip. And right click and your enhance dialog box will still be there. Right there, you can get it going and it will do all of them in one batch process. I don't think that's an option in Topaz. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you've used it recently, but
I haven't used it
I don't think you can
recently.
do multiple, right? I think it does one at a time.
I've only ever used it to do it one at a time. So.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but it's really nice that feature's built in that you can do multiple at one time. Yeah. That said, here's the second part. This tool is really heavily GPU accelerated to the point where I had somebody told me this tool dropped. I don't know what system they're working on, but they did one image, and I know they're not using a super high resolution camera. They did one image and said it took that computer 30 minutes to process this denoise. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. So I went in, I updated Lightroom. For reference, I have in my PC a 5900X processor and a 3060 Ti GPU. Not super high end by any means. The GPU is great, but it's not super high end. However, it took mine probably 10 seconds to do one image, probably 5 minutes to do a stack of 30. That is pretty good. Obviously, there's room for improvement. I'm sure it'll get faster. So if you have an old laptop or an old PC, I would expect it to take a while, especially if you don't have a dedicated graphics card, because I did see it pushing the GPU up at 90-95% completely during that time.
Word. Yeah, I haven't had any issues with speed. I'm pretty sure that I'm like definitely sub 10 seconds an image. I have a GTX 1080 Ti, which is like not new tech. It's a pretty dang old card. What I should do though, my Razer laptop, it's a Stealth. It doesn't have like a really beefy graphics card, but it does have a dedicated. But it's it's called an MX 150, which is basically like slightly better than a 1030, which is almost not even a graphics card. So I would be curious. I should probably run like I'll run a couple of tests and let you know after the show with like the same images on both. Because I'd be curious because like this would probably be. I would say my Stealth is probably like pretty low end what most photographers are probably starting on nowadays.
Yeah, now. And you can get a really good laptop for a pretty good price these days that outperforms the MX 150 by, years.
That's what I mean. Yeah, like
what we've gone through.
If you're getting like starter laptops around $600, I think they're probably stronger nowadays.
They'll handle. They'll handle. What's interesting though is, as I noted, the GPU being pushed hard to make this speed up. Why can't that be applied to spot healing? I just don't see it. Yeah. I don't know if it's a latency thing or what, but it just.
I don't know. It seems as though like they haven't really gone through and revamped a lot of that tooling, and it's probably because like most people doing serious spot healing are going to do it in Photoshop.
That's true. Or they could have been working on a new version of this for a while.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I'd like to see it revamped for sure.
Yeah,
especially because a lot of the new tools, like I almost tried Capture One again, and I refuse because I think how the two programs are set up, just my brain functions better with it.
If you've used Lightroom for a long time, sorry to interrupt you. If you've used Lightroom for a long time, you know that nothing is instant in Lightroom, and they've been using in Lightroom Classic, I should say. I don't use the other one, so nothing is instant. There's tons of room for improvement, and if it means rebuilding some of these tools from the ground up, such as this Denoise tool, I'll take it.
Yeah, but it's even so much better than it was in like 2017. So they're definitely doing the dang thing. I'm certainly a fan, but yeah, I'd like to see that revamped now that they're starting to really utilize graphics and stuff like that. I guess we'll just see.
I think that's all I had to say about this tool. It's cool. Just use it as as lightly as you feel you need to.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have a whole lot of rumors or anything this week. I spoke with you briefly. Sony Alpha Rumors posted about a potential what would it be, a FX10, and I think I almost threw my camera out the window. I was so pissed. Like, okay, yeah, cool. What are they gonna do? Take the ZVE 10 and make it an FX body, and then potentially give that more tech than all of their other high-end cameras? That was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that would be real rough.
You know what I read today that's pretty wild though? I guess Nikon is working on the 200 to 600 for the Z mount, which is pretty fire. Again, I just want them to come out the gate, because if they start scaring people, we'll all benefit. So
yeah, I think the question I've seen asked is, will this 200 to 600 come with a built-in TC? That would be a really big differentiator from the other available 200. Is it only just Sony that has a 200 to 600?
Yeah, I think so.
Or does Canon have one? Oh, okay.
Canon doesn't. No, but and here's the problem with that idea is that changes it from a $2,000 lens that competes with the Sony and the Sigma to a $5,000 to $8,000 lens. Once you have that like built-in TC, you're playing a pretty wild game.
Yeah, they've just done it with a couple other high-end, longer tele lenses, and it'd be interesting. And we'd love to see something interesting like that, because they have prime opportunity now to really start pulling people back.
Yeah, still no word on the freaking Z8 though. So
well, I don't know. I've been watching Nikon rumors. Have you not seen some of them?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's like,
we have rumors of announcements, right?
They're
end
like
of May maybe.
Yeah. It exists. We know it exists.
Well,
but like,
did you see briefly the Pakistan version of Nikon's page had the little placeholder up? So like it's here. Like we're just waiting on them to go. Here it is.
Yeah. Like I said, I just want to hear some news. I want it to be a D850 mirrorless that has like 4K 60 at least, and like I hope it slam dunks on the A7R5. To be completely honest, that's what we need. But
yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if it has. the Z9's autofocus system and anything more, because what the A7R5 and now the ZV-E1 has with the AI chip or whatever you want to call it to assist with autofocus, I think Nikon's already been kind of behind the game for a long time since the start of them getting into mirrorless. They've been behind. Canon's about to leapfrog with, what is it, quad pixel AF or something.
Yeah.
They're working on that. This is probably going to put them on par with whatever Sony's got with this AI chip. So Nikon's got to do something, unless they're just going to be comfortable and Nikon shooters going to do what Nikon shooters do. And, oh, if it's a Z9 without the grip, I'll buy it type of people. You know, they're out there.
Canon could be like right with everybody else right now if they took, I think it was the C200 had like the best face detect autofocus ever, where if you got off screen it didn't change the autofocus, it stayed on the same plane. Put that in your cameras.
Right.
It's so good.
Isn't that what the AI chip for Sony does now too?
I'd have to relook at it. I've been so pissed that
I feel like I've seen that with the new version. Yeah.
I hope if that's the case. I don't think people talked about it enough, because that's a huge, like, it's so good.
It's impressive to see that, because a person disappears. There's something it could focus on, but it knows a person is out there and could come back. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, it makes it look like somebody's actually operating your camera. It's not just like some freaking autofocus thing. Then it just like switches and does. Oh man, it's so good. Did you see anything on that 100 to 300 f2.8?
Yeah, I've seen a few things. Actually, Jared Pullen got his hands on it this weekend, and I saw some of the images he posted. It looks like a nice lens. It's way up there in price, but for a 100 to 300 2.8, it's got to be.
Yeah. Put a 2x
I did hear it's a lot
on
lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But he was talking about it being quite a bit lighter than the older version.
The 120 to 300 from Sigma.
Yes, about a pound and a half or so lighter.
That's pretty wild.
We're now from DSLR to mirrorless, so it makes sense. But that's a big, going from 6.5, 7 pounds down to around 5. You might not think is a big difference, but when you got to hold that damn thing for hours, it is a huge difference.
Yeah, I can tell you, I was random tangent. I was doing a bunch of drills the other day, and I had a laser illuminator on my rifle that only weighs 3/4 pound. And my arms were dead by the end of the day. I took it off the next day, and it felt like I didn't even have weight on the freaking thing. It was nuts. So, like, sub-pound weights when you're, like, holding the camera up all day, that's huge. I just love that formula. I think it's a cool-ass lens. Because, like, do I really use 70 to 100 that much on a 70 to 200? Not really. Do I bust out the 70 to 200 unless I have to use that longer lens? Not really. So, like, I actually kind of really like that formula to have.
Yeah.
Now think about a 200 to, what would that be? A 200 to 600 with a teleconverter.
That'd be an F4 at a 2X.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
That's
really good. But what's the price on that? Can you remind me?
I wish I remembered. I'm sure it's premium as heck for sure.
Yeah, because I think Jared said that there was only 2 in the U.S. a couple of days ago to give out.
I mean, it's a $10,000 lens, but
there we go.
But you're getting a 600 f4 with a teleconverter. That's buck wild. I know I'm talking about already changing camera systems, but some of the stuff that I want to start doing is the stuff that you just can't do with consumer stuff, because that's where, like, these cameras start to make sense. I have been looking at longer lenses again. I do miss the 200 to 600. I don't regret selling it, because at the time I was probably going to be traveling and never touching it again.
Yeah, it needs change. We get it.
But yeah, like, even the updates for your Sigma are, going to be really compelling, because if you can just squeeze out more firmware from your existing hardware, Sony, then, like, that's such a good value. That lens is already great. It's a little heavy, but I love how tanky it is. And if you're going to get more, like, you're talking about going up to 12,800, but if you get another extra stop and a half on the wide end and like 2 stops on the far end, dude, you're back down to, like, easy 8,000, 6,400 ISO. That's
Yeah,
huge.
I was gonna touch on this before the show ended. This announcement from Sigma was kind of surprising to me. They've had a couple, I think two. We're on version .02 or something, second firmware update anyway, for the Sigma 150 to 600 DGDN for Sony. It's not difficult to update this thing. It is really cool that we are able to squeeze out extra performance, but it's not just about what the lens is able to now do, or this new version that's coming out soon that they've announced. It is really good brand image for them to go, hey, you're going to give us, $1,000, $1,200, whatever. We're going to continue to give you more value.
It's huge.
Sony should be listening to this. This is amazing. So what we're getting in version 3 is not only this updated stabilization. It's like a 4.5 stops at the long end, up to, I think it said 6, right? So
I think it's 6 at the long end, 4.5 or 5.5 on the wide end.
Something like that. Yeah. It's extra performance. So we're talking about an extra stop, an extra, bump up from like 8,000 to 12,800 or whatever, or bump down. That's amazing performance. On top of that, they're saying that they're improving AF tracking ability, which is incredible too. I have been shooting a ton of birds, as you've heard, and I've had nothing but struggles trying to get my camera and this lens to try to rack focus through branches and things like that, leaves, and all the types of things you start to see in springtime through the trees. And rack focus is a little different from AF tracking, but if we can get just a little bit of improved performance in autofocus, I will be super happy. And big respect to Sigma for continuing to push firmware updates to improve their products. That's amazing.
And not only is it just like a lens that's been out for a while, they've released a update to that lens and they're still supporting that lens. Like the 60 to 600 came out later.
That's true.
And they're still supporting the 150 to 600, which is just huge to me. Because they understand that that's a very popular lens. And they're like, okay, well, a lot of these people aren't going to just sell this and get the 60 to 600. That's a totally different vibe. It's more expensive, I think, by like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right.
It's killer. I did want to ask, because I don't know that you and I have ever talked about it yet. How does that handle with bird detect autofocus in the A7 IV?
It's okay. It's honestly pretty good. Like I was just saying, so when I'm shooting on the river, and basically there's 3 layers of foreground, a middle ground of water, and then a background of trees or whatever, it's really, really easy to pick up on whatever I'm trying to focus on because there's not much in the way.
Sure.
That said, I was just trying to find warblers and small birds in trees, and man, it can struggle trying to get focus through branches. It is tough. I have my custom button. Let me see if I can show this custom button here. This one here to set to where if I'm holding, I press that button, and then I'm able to rack focus manually as I also have autofocus. I have to do that constantly because the camera and this lens combination, as much as I really enjoy using them, just doesn't seem to pick up on birds through branches sometimes. It's really frustrating. I don't know if firmware can help with that or not. I don't know, but
that's a bummer.
Man,
that you have
it's fun, but it struggles sometimes.
Yeah. And as far as I know, Sony's DMF doesn't work for third-party lenses, does it?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. So you familiar with using DMF?
Is that where you can manual focus override?
Yeah.
I don't think that works.
Because just needing to press the button is a pain.
Yes, yeah, because that leaves basically because the lens is so big, I press with my thumb and it leaves basically my ring finger to do that work, and the throw is long, so I'm like, it's a struggle.
Yeah, it's a shame I didn't have the A7 IV or access to it really when I had the 200 to 600, because I definitely some of the birds, up at camp and stuff, mostly like red-winged blackbirds and things like that, always running through the lakes, like what do you call them, tall grass and stuff. It was always super challenging to get any of those birds.
I've heard this very specific through branches, trying to find birds type of struggle from other photographers, not just in Sony, but in Nikon. Not much from Canon. I think they're a little bit more on the ball with this, but I've heard from other Nikon mirrorless shooters as well that this is just a struggle that for some reason didn't seem to be as big of an issue. Maybe it's because all autofocus just wasn't as good, so the issue wasn't as apparent for this specific scenario. But I've heard it from other Nikon shooters that shooting through branches to try to find birds has been a struggle there as well. So I don't know if it's worse with this combination, but it's just something I've noticed. It is fun to use, man. I love the look. I've been really tuned into exactly what settings I need to be on to get like the best looking photos out of it. But yeah, sometimes that's the one scenario. And I'm in that scenario a lot for like spring migration. So we'll see if I can develop any techniques for that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'll have to. I don't know if it'll be if I keep the Sony and end up with a teleconverter, because I still want to test that with the 70-200 at some point, or if I end up switching systems or something. But we got to find a time now that it's going to be warm that I can just come up and we get a morning to do some wildlife, show me the ropes and stuff, how you do that kind of stuff, because I haven't done a lot of it, but
yeah, dude, it's nice where I go because it's basically guaranteed action no matter what.
Yeah.
There's so much diversity where I drive out to in East Jordan. You can pick any day and pretty much have something to look at. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, we'll just have to figure out in the next coming months like how we can kind of maximize a couple of days time.
Yeah.
And like do some landscape, do some astro maybe, do some wildlife stuff, make some content for both of the channels. Drink a lot of coffee and
maybe make some videos out of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'd be fun.
Cool.
But yeah, that's all I got. I do have some secret sauce coming this week, so we'll have to touch base about that, and I'm sure we'll chat. But next week's episode will be pretty interesting because I'll have a lot of data to talk about and whatnot. So that's my little teaser.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that was pretty good. I don't have too much more. I'm glad it was a relatively chill week. I promise by the end of next week into the next episode, I will have shot both of my Sony lenses I've been neglecting. And I'll have more to say about the 20-70 and the 70-200 in general. The guy who actually might buy mine, he owns my original Mark 1.
Oh, funny.
And he's selling it because he was just like curious. His notes were, it's drastically lighter. Like the Mark II is just like, he's like, I shoot on this lens every day. When I put that Mark II on my body, I went, holy crap. So,
yeah, but you knew that too, right?
Well, I mean, but I didn't have them side by side, right? So
true.
A lot of the things that he was saying was really interesting to me because he still has both in hand, and we both shoot similar stuff. He shoots a lot of firearms stuff and travel stuff and things like that. So we're really on the same page. But what was interesting is outside of the actual upgrades, which are like the autofocus is much better. It's very fast. It's much lighter. The aperture ring is great, blah, blah, blah. He said the rendering is so similar. And that was actually what his pause was, is because the Sony 70-200 Mark I had this like little bit of like interesting, not quite swirl, but like the bokeh it's nice. It looks good and it has its own kind of character. And he was like, it's still in the Mark II. So that was what he was hoping for. He's like, I don't want to like feel like I'm missing the couple of pros to my original lens. But he also noted that it feels like it has a much shorter minimum focusing distance. So he can do almost macro-esque stuff even a little better, which the Mark I, if you're unfamiliar, their big marketing thing was it was the closest focusing 70-200 ever. And it was like by, I think, a foot or something, or maybe multiple feet. It can focus closer than just about all of the other major companies 70-200.
Yeah, I was just going to say, didn't Tamron make an alternate 70-200 that had macro? It was basically, that was its thing.
I'm not sure.
Maybe it's slightly different. Maybe it's not a 70-200, but I swear, didn't it have like a blue ring? I'll have to look this up, but
sure.
I almost remember there being a 70-200 alternate to the main one that they sold that was sold and marketed as being macro. That's interesting. I'll have to go back and look at that. Back in the DSLR days.
Canon has the 70-300 DO, which has a blue ring and is a very interesting, weird lens.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been looking at Canon stuff.
Right on. But yeah, as far as I know, nothing from any of the major contenders, and it is great.
It's interesting.
It focuses so. I mean, it's similar to you using your 150-600, and you're like, I can zoom so tight.
Yeah.
So that's neat. But it's always nice when you get a second set of eyes and experience on something to reaffirm, like, did this investment I make actually make sense? And that felt cool. Good because, like, obviously I bought my Mark I at retail, and then I traded it for a 24-70, which was way less money. And then I went and bought the new one at retail, which is like $2,800.
Yeah, so this guy's looking at a pretty good deal then, because he can offload the original for a really close value to probably what he got it from you for.
He probably, we traded straight up for the 24-70 to the 70-200. So, like, I think he's asking $1,500, which I think you can still get all day.
Yeah.
For the stuff. But yeah, anyway, that was pretty
good.
Cool.
Yeah, if it's a win-win, that's cool.
Yeah, we'll find out soon if I lose my mind and sell my stuff. The 2x teleconverter went up for sale again on B&H, and it's been out of stock for a while. And I am still really keen because I think 400 f4 is really compelling. That's hard to beat at just about any part of the day, and I think I'd use it a lot at work. And I get the creator discount, which is
I was just going to ask if you could get the discount on that.
It's only like $438.
Before the discount?
After. It's like almost $600, that freaking teleconverter.
Every time I think about maybe picking one up, I always forget how much they are, and I go back and I'm like, oh, never mind. I'll just get a different lens with that money.
Right. Well, and so for me, like, because I no longer have the 200-600, and I guess even if I did, I would still love to have a freaking 1200. Generally, I go, okay, well, I should probably get a dedicated long lens, but the 70-200 is so clinically sharp that I don't think that there's going to be a degradation of quality at all to me.
I think you're right. Like, I don't think there's a lot of lenses you could say that about, but I think that combination works, and you're right about that. Like,
I think at 400 millimeters, it's going to be still sharper and faster than the 200-600. So it's really hard for me to justify when, like, I have a decent amount of crop room on a 33 megapixel. I don't need 600 fully. I can kind of probably get away with what I need to do and not have a giant lens. But there's just not a lot of people that have run the teleconverter with the 70-200. So I haven't been able to get good, other experiences to go off of. But it's a damn sharp lens. And, instead of spending another $2,000 again, I can save a shitload of money. So
you could probably rent that for really cheap.
Oh yeah,
while you still have the Sony gear and just play with it.
Yeah, I plan to. I just got to have the right access to a shoot or something that makes it worth it.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, right on. That's all I got for you. If you're still listening, thank you. I haven't had any submissions for next month yet, but I'm gonna push it a little harder. I'm gonna throw a couple of reels up on Instagram this week talking about the show. We had one of our episodes pop off a little bit, got a few hundred views, so that was cool. Maybe I can kind of squeeze some of that. Not that I'm like hungry for views, but some of you that I know that are watching regularly, I'd love to see your work still. And let's build, link up and build. Good old grind culture from like 2016. Let's go.
Check the show notes below. Listen to the previous episode to hear what our submission challenge was. Recap, shoot something in black and white. If you would like to join us in our, what we're calling a monthly, not so challenge competition thing,
photo share,
submit a photo shoot, just a monthly little photo shoot. Take one image. This month to mid-May is a black and white image. It doesn't have to be anything special, but if you'd like to join us, you can submit that image to us. The email to submit that is in the show notes below, description on YouTube, and give us some information about what you're shooting with, settings. If you have any questions for us, we'd love to answer those questions.
Yeah, and like always, anything that we we talked about today. I'll have links in the description and in the show notes. I'll find Nick Page's video on the denoise comparison. I'll throw that in there, and you'll have all that other goodness. But otherwise, we'll probably be back in 1 week.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Right on. See you next time.
Bye, guys.